What is up, y'all? It's your boy Aniki, and today we're going to switch things up and be covering One Piece chapter 1030. I've been thinking about adding One Piece to the channel for a while, and it's kind of nice to talk about a different series besides My Hero. It's been a while since I've gotten to do that, so I just wanted to take this time and, just kind of give my thoughts on this particular chapter, especially because it's kind of been a controversial one anyway, so I want to just I'm going to skip the cover page because the Ants and Brook don't have a story value. This isn't one of those cover pages that's about an actual narrative like the godforsaken cover story. We got this arc where Pound was confirmed to be alive. So, yeah. But at the very least, it's, a cover story. So, just going to immediately jump into what's going on here with the first page being Apu and Drake. And on one hand, I know people think it's kind of funny that Diaz, Drake, and Apu are sitting here, both being traitors and sitting there trying to plot alliances, and how Diaz, Drake seems to be willing to make an alliance with anyone. But first off, he's alone. And one of the things that I thought about after reading that he said he's a one-man army and alone is that there's a very good chance that when he recruited his crew for being a pirate, those are all genuine pirates that he picked up and must have impressed with his strength. So they themselves might not have even been aware that he was actually a man of the Navy, which goes to show his dedication to that deep cover op and how important Sword must have been to them, keeping in mind that he was also a Marine HQ rear admiral before Sword happened, and he seemed to be able to tango with the Pacifista. So obviously that was probably what I would call an alternate promotion, where he was basically offered like being a vice admiral or becoming somebody who's going to be traveling and doing this and ultimately setting up to take down Kaido. This was realistically a 3 to 4 year plan, one with him becoming a supernova, so that he can, have that notoriety, so that people have a reason to believe that he's that dude, and then, actually infiltrating the crew and doing what's necessary. And with Wano not being a part of the world government, obviously they didn't care about the citizens and stuff being hurt, hence him being able to destroy Amagasa village. Now, Apu doing this makes complete sense because he had already entered into an alliance with Kaido by the time he joined up with Kid and Hawkins. And the reality of the situation is that for absolutely no reason, he was betrayed by Queen. And when you've made it a point to betray other supernova, when you tried your best to actually work for him, and you can see that the numbers that are in here are with him, obviously he was the one that was leading them, so it's kind of clear that they have a legitimate bond with him as a leader, to the extent where they'd rather follow Apu than somebody like Queen at this point, who was willing to air out the entire facility with the Ice Oni rounds. Neither one of them had a motive for actually continuing that fight between the two of them, so of course, they're going to sit around and be like, all right, what should we do next? Instead of fighting, let's make our next move and make sure it's a successful one. Whether they actually decide to take on a Yonko, or they decide to let's just work together to get the hell out of here, or whether it's Diaz Drake tries to get Apu recruited into the Marines as well as the numbers, because the Navy would love to have the numbers back, since they are apparently Vegapunk experiments. It just seems like the rational conclusion for both of these characters to do one last betrayal for these pirate alliances so that they can survive and get out of there, and hopefully get Diaz Drake back into the Marines for his sake, and find out what's going on there. Or maybe we'll get a big final stand of another enemy popping up, and we'll get all the supernovas having formed mini factions coming together, since we're seeing all, this coalescing of power. Komachio, don't care. Like, okay, cool, the dog ulti injured, but really that's just kind of like a thing that they're just keeping track of, and a way to keep them slightly distracted so they're not going at full speed, so that they'll notice that Pkinemon's legs are running around. This part, I'm gonna be honest, since we saw Pkinemon's face be used as a jigsaw puzzle, okay, fine, yes, we know that Law's powers he was able to be taken apart and reassembled. Fine, Law didn't make it a point to cut him in half and fix him or anything like that with room, I guess. Sure. Does it work within the story? Yes. Does that make giving such an emotional, intense moment to Pkinemon and Kaido okay? I would say no. I think we should have just had him club him, and he should have done an actual slash instead of a stab. I really wish you would have had him slash Oda. That would have make a lot more sense, because Now you got people saying maybe getting bopped on the head was starting to loosen it up, and that stab was like that last little cut. And maybe, but we don't know. And I just hope the anime does this scene slightly differently so that at the very least Kaido slashes him, and that's why he does this instead of letting it be a stab. Obviously, the fart joke. That's all. Another reason why I don't like this too, because it's like, levity is nice, but I think sometimes Oda has to realize that we don't need comedy in every single moment. Sometimes we can actually let things have their weight. And I think this scene, if it hadn't been done in a comedic style, might have been a bit more palatable. But we get them, going back to Rush, hopefully, based on what Pkinemon's words, is to save Pkiku. And then we get confirmation that Pkanjuro is still alive, and Orochi gives him an important edict. Now, the speech that Orochi gives is actually pretty solid. It's just giving us two heartfelt scabbard interaction moments with Pkanjuro, and him still being alive is a little disappointing for a lot of us, to the extent where, I think that maybe there's just a silent P at the beginning. We've already seen the Pterodon this arc, why not? So we see the giant fire spirit. I know like some people are like, oh, this is really dumb, but we also quickly kind of bounce back to a little later in the chapter to what Yamato's goal is, running through trying to make sure that they get to the explosives and disarm them. So the fire is clearly there to ultimately explode the bombs before Yamato can get them off the island. But in the process, if the bombs in the bunker explode above the capital, it is basically one giant firework. And so it is now allowing for the story to go from we need to get these bombs off, or Onigashima is going to fall on the capital, to we need to get everybody off of Onigashima before the bombs explode so that it can detonate over the capital. And while the rocks and stuff will still do some damage, if we have somebody like Law, somebody, like different Pterodons, like we got the King, we got Marco, we got people who can fly. We have a decent number of characters capable of flying and stuff like that, that they should be able to escape. Hell, a bunch of them might even be able to get away with riding Momo and dealing with clouds and stuff like that. So that could be one of the big upsides to Momo being aged up, is that he'll finally be able to generate giant clouds, and then a bunch of people will be saved by that, or he'll have a bunch of little clouds over the city that catch the rubble, and then he'll move the rubble that way. Similar to how Fujitora took all the rubble from Dressrosa. So we do have some stuff that we can work with here. I just want to kind of highlight that. Like how that plot can actually turn into something interesting while still stopping Momo from having full mastery over his dragon capabilities, because it's clear at this point that part of the reason Vegapunk does not consider that fruit a success is because it doesn't help the user understand how to use it that well. I'm also going to just say that once again we got the let's get out of here, there's no time to fight. Once the stuff is burning down, and that seems I don't know if that's CP0 saying that or if that's Brook and Robin saying that, but either way, I think that the fact that those panels are set next to each other on this particular page is indicative of that we will be getting that CP0 versus Brook fight that some of the people have been hyping up. And because we also get this on the same page that we have, Marco, Izo, and Kawamatsu handling fodder, but we also get the emphasis of the Sanji and Queen matchup, the emphasis of Luffy versus Kaido, and the emphasis of King versus Zoro. So it just kind of seems like a nice way to set that up and like keep that in the forefronts of our minds. And then obviously the Yamato makes the decision to keep going. Well, we don't know if Yamato decides to keep going or if Yamato is just going to watch it happen. It's also worth noting that those bombs that are, depending on, well, we'll explain that later, because my favorite part of this chapter is actually towards the end, and this is the part that I think is really good. And so we get to see that like Kid has been blasted off the floor by Big Mom's Ikoko sovereignty. Now the Elbaf sphere blasting Kid and his like mech starting to fall apart, but him still being functional, and we get a cut back to them kind of discussing mid-combat their strategies. Of Kid basically as being like, yo, Law, what's your deal? Do you have Awakening? And then both being like, all right, yo, I got Awakening. It's real taxing. It's the ace in the hole, though. We got to be careful with it. And I've seen some people be like, oh, well, it was a 5 versus 2 on the rooftop. They should have used it there. No, it was 5 versus 2. They had a bigger advantage in that fight, numbers wise, than they do currently in this fight. So they saved these because they were hoping to not have to spend this ability. But it's also mandatory that we point out that Law directly stated I could go inside of your body to deliver a surgery of death, and that kid straight up said, could you handle being crushed and compacted? It's worth noting also that while they were talking to Kaido, and everybody's been focused on Kaido's scales, Big Mom has been referred to as an iron balloon, when the only thing that's ever damaged her is when she fell down in complete despair and scraped up her knees. That's the only and when you've seen her outside of that, we've only seen her take internal damage from specifically Law when he counter-shocked her on the roof, when he counter-shocked her on the live floor or whatever floor they were on, and Prometheus straight up said that he hurt Mama. And now we see it here once again. So the third time we've seen Big Mom take damage is Law using Kroom. Now, I actually really like Kroom because it kind of is the embodiment of his entire character. People have been like, oh, well, why didn't we see them training for... First off, let's be real here. I think part of the problem here is that a lot of people really wanted to... And this comes down to agenda piece and a lot of the stuff that people with agendas push. But a lot of people really wanted it to be the case where, like, oh, Law and Kid are barely above a Yonko commander. They can't handle a Yonko commander. I don't know. And like now this idea of them having awakening makes that sound silly. And people have had these agendas, and it's largely because a lot of people like feats, myself included. But I also understand the kind of portrayal that Oda tries to go for at times, and sometimes he leans a little too into you gotta believe in people's titles and their clout, even though he also makes it a point to debunk his own narrative that you should believe in titles and clout, which you could also say is the same thing about how he said you should never kill people, and he does lots of fake out deaths. But hey, whatever, sometimes people are hypocrites. We got to deal with that. Now, the reason why I say though that Law's Awakening kind of embodies all this stuff, and I know some people are like, well, why didn't he use it on Dressrosa? I also want to remind people that on Dressrosa, Law had fought Dofi and Fujitora in the same day. He had been caught and tortured to the extent that when Luffy and Law were on their way up the mountaintop, he was just tied to the bull to make sure he wasted no physical energy. He did not come into the fight against Dofi and Treble and wow, I forgot Spring Hopper Boy's name for some reason. I'm just blanking on it, but whatever. Him and Luffy did not come into that fight with Law at 100%. So, and also this idea that he has terrible hockey when he blocked Pentochromatic String with his arms just using hardening when it was capable of slicing the building behind him, but it didn't slice him, is just straight up people not remembering certain stuff about Law's fighting. And that's okay, because the other thing that we want to talk about here is that Law was trained by Doflamingo and given this fruit by the Don Quixote family, and he was supposed to, and we talk about how he was trained in swordsmanship by Diamante, he was trained in gunnery by Gladius, and all these things that he learned from them back in the day in the martial arts. And then he applied those, like you have moves like injection shot, you have that infusing his doctor skills with the counter shock and the gamma knife. And so when you look at the way Kroom functions and the way the shockwave ability comes into play here, is that Kroom takes the ideas of his gunnery, or like the move in injection shot, the concepts of radio knife where he coats the sword and the power from the room. It takes which we haven't seen radio knife in a while. It takes the damaging internal from gamma knife. It takes the electricity of countershock. It takes the sheer principle of room and all these things, and it combines it into one ability. So it's like the apex. And the funny thing about this is that we should have been able to at least speculate something like this could happen. And I've seen people like, well, there's no reason for Law to have gotten stronger. He hasn't trained. Obviously he has trained, because we saw him pull out a new move against Kaido after he used injection shot known as antibacterial curtain. So we saw Law create a barrier, which we had never seen him do before, on the rooftop. So we know he has improved. And let's be real, the Law that was on the rooftop that got hit by a lightning bolt from Indra, who got hit by the club from Kaido, who also got hit by a Thunder Bagua from Kaido, that's not the same Law durability wise that we would have expected to see in Dressrosa. Even as a Law fan myself, I would not have expected to see that. That's not like, he's made that progress. His durability has increased, and I think it also comes down to people. This is partially the just shonen power creep because of the way the warlords were handled pre-time skip, where you had somebody like Boa, who was clearly able to deal with every pacifista she ran into. She ran through a bunch of them. You had Mihawk, you had Dofi still looking really good as a warlord, and then you had Kuma, who was looking really good as a warlord. You had Moria, who was busting islands that a lot of people like to clown, but again, he's the warlord that it took like all of them to beat. And, you know, you have Crocodile, who, like, he beat him, but then even at Marineford, Crocodile seemed a lot stronger than he was during Alabasta, and part of that was he had regained his will. A lot of the people in the Grand Line, like you know, Crocodile and Moria especially, had kind of had their crews wiped, their wills are broken, they weren't at the peak mind state, they weren't at that big confidence and that ambition level that you need to properly be, you know, out here fighting New World pirates and doing that thing. So when Marineford rolled around, especially in the case of Crocodile, he was looking even more powerful than he used to, because he had that will back, that hockey, that spirit. And spirit is really important in One Piece. Like, it sometimes just leads to, it feels like, oh, that's just a willpower power. But like, yeah, kinda. But that's what it is. It's their will, their spirit. So just knowing through all that, and knowing that hockey is supposed to bloom through combat and these trials and tribulations, it makes sense for all of them to be stronger. Like, we saw Law end up running into Hawkins and fold him like twice during the course of Wano, where obviously he would have had a couple run-ins here and there and fought a couple people, getting a little extra practice, time to like sit down and really think about it. And it's important to note that Law had been in Wano throughout the entirety of Whole Cake and was there. So he was there for like 6 weeks. It's been like 6 weeks. It's been like the longest amount of time we've actually been able to keep track of in One Piece. In a long time, not counting the 2-year time skip, obviously. So we have the established scenario for Law to make those improvements. And with Kid, we didn't know enough about Kid, and we hadn't seen enough of his combat experiences, but we saw him try to crush. And I think part of the reason that even Queen's move being like a submission hold and crushing Sanji, who has like that metal exoskeleton, was partially Oda like letting us know that the idea of crushing and compacting people and like trying to break them through compression is a viable strategy. You don't need to only cut or punch somebody. You can squeeze and crush them. It's effectively Oda like ahead of time telling us submission holds are viable. Just because he doesn't explore martial arts as much as he did during Enies Lobby doesn't mean that the martial arts don't still have different values. Like we see Fishman Jiu-Jitsu, Fishman Judo, Fishman Karate. Jinbei using 3 different forms of martial arts, which some specialize in throws and holds, others specialize in strikes. So this is kind of Oda establishing like different skill sets, different combat styles matter and impact different people's bodies differently. So Kid having Awakening, who Kid, just like Law, just like Luffy and other characters who's had their devil fruit for years and years, over a decade, finally getting to that point just makes sense. I know a lot of people feel like, well, how come the Awakening wasn't foreshadowed? I mean, how come Katakuri and Doflamingo, characters who are Yonko commanders and a warlord, can have Awakening, but you need a full breakdown on the path of Law and Kid to getting Awakening? How does that even track? Any villain can have basically any power, and we do not question it. Nobody was like, how did Katakuri train for Future Sight? No, Oda's a fraud. Because we didn't need him to do that. We accept other people can have different abilities. And if anything, if we're going to look at the way that, you know, them talking about the surgical death from inside and the potential foreshadowing of the submission hold on Sanji with his exoskeleton, and then, you know, bringing that forward. So when you look at Kid and his punk crash and how he's basically doing a Chibaku Tensei, if you really think about it, they've done it before. If they've got, you know, Hera and Napoleon sealed up in there, Napoleon and Hera probably aren't going to be able to get out because they're just in a pile of metal. The only real hope they'd have is Prometheus, and Law can likely shambles Prometheus out there. If we really want to get wild with it, Kid can just launch Big Mom out of the... At this point, he can repel her through Onigashima, out the building, and have her fall off. We can throw her out of the fight again. And she doesn't even have to actually go down here. at that point. She can just have been thrown off and still survive that fall, but she can be taken out of the fight just due to the circumstances and, you know, not being able to get back up there and not having immediate access to Prometheus and stuff like that. So for those of you who really don't want anybody but Luffy to beat Big Mom, there's your way for this raid to continue, for them to get through with this stuff, for them not to completely kill her so that she can still chase them across the new world, as Luffy did say he was going to kick her ass across the new world, and it would still, and I know some people are like, oh, but like, then Luffy's not getting all the credit, because Luffy doesn't deserve all the credit anyway. He was over-credited in Whole Cake. So if Law and Kid end up getting a little extra clout off this, that just makes sense. It's about spin. And with CP0 here, and some of this stuff likely isn't even coming out. For all we know, they'll use this as a chance to claim the government covered this. So while obviously we don't know as much about Kid, we can get, if you really need it, some explanations in the future of how Kid has done, or how he trained with his fruit. Because at the end of the day, the dude's been making mechs. He made a fully operational Gatling harpoon gun. The dude is making winches and giant robot arms where out of swords and stuff, like reconverting the metal and shaping it, which means he's been using magnetism to forge these things and rewire and do all this other stuff this whole time. So from that perspective, it only makes sense that eventually he would be able to charge anything with that magnetism and then do something with it. And with it being like hard magnetic charge, it likely passes all the metal, which keeps it pulling on each other tighter and tighter. So that's the compression that he wanted to do on Kaido. That's why he tested out Punk Vice. So it just kind of is what it is. I mean, they put most of their effort into Kaido when they were on the roof. Like that 5-round thing where it was Scyther Sonic and Punk Gibson and Luffy was using like the rifle and all that other stuff. Like they back to back them. They mainly were attacking Kaido. When they decided to focus on Big Mom, they just decided to throw her out of the ring because their goal was to kill Kaido in that combat, and that's just what it was. So anyways, let me know what you guys thought, because yeah, I don't like the whole Will of Pkanjuro and Pkinemon and Pkiku, but it seems to be where we are. I'm hoping that we can get something very good out of them living through all this stuff, since the whole, hopefully Pkinemon, if Pkinemon is gonna die, he could have died here. If he's gonna live, then he at least needs to get to go be with his wife. That's kind of how I look at it. Like, don't give me him dying later. Like, oh, now that I've seen Momo, I'm gonna die. Like, if you're gonna keep flip-flopping, just stick with your levity approach and just let Pkinemon have his wife. That's how I look at that. But let me know what you guys think. I'm gonna try to get this edited and out there. Hope you guys really enjoy this. It's a change of pace for me. Yep. Normally I do My Hero. Don't worry, My Hero fans. I'll still be doing Church of MHA. I just wanted to do some One Piece talks today. That's all I gotta say. Like, follow, comment down below. Let me know what's up. I'm Aniki, and I'm out.